You made it. Some of us didn't. and that's okay. They told you it was going to be cold, and they didn't lie. It is very cold. But I want to make a quick plug for my childhood. Okay, it was colder when I was a kid. So I don't know what your problem is. No, I'm just kidding. It's very cold. So this morning, I want to kick right into good questions again. I got one more good one here for you. At least I think so. This morning, I just want to tell you a quick story. When I was younger for a while, I had this idea about Jesus, and it was about 18, 19, college time, and my idea was that Jesus seemed to be, very famous. He's probably a very good person, very good man, probably even called by God, maybe some kind of a prophet. But the idea to me that Jesus was actually like God as a man walking around with people was just a little bit much for me. And I had this theory that people took the story of Jesus and they probably just kind of layered things onto it over time. Like he's probably a really good guy, probably a very charismatic teacher and all of that, but the whole supernatural thing that this is in fact God in a person, like that was a bit much for me to swallow. And I thought, maybe he never really even intended for people to think that he was God. That wasn't really part of his deal, but that just kind of got, injected in there over the years for various reasons, okay? Now you think that's the weirdest thing I ever heard of. Actually, that's not a weird idea at all. There are a lot of people who think that might be the case. And there are people as well who think that maybe the story was really just created top to bottom, way after the fact. There really wasn't a Jesus, or if there was a Jesus, he probably wasn't anything like what they're talking about, and they just kind of capitalized on the story after the fact to kind of create something that people would believe in as a way to control people. Religion can be used to control people, so some people think that may be true. Some people think there just was never a Jesus, period. It just wasn't. He was a complete invention of someone's mind, and, thousands of years ago, somebody came up with this idea to get wealth and power and respect and use for all kinds of selfish motivations. I think it's worth talking about. Because honestly, this is what I think. When you know someone, or if you are someone who really doesn't have much of an outward opinion about Jesus, never talks about Jesus, very uncomfortable discussing Jesus, a lot of the times this is the case. They're just not sure what to make of Jesus, right? What is Jesus really who he said he was? Or who they say? Who you say? Is Jesus that? Well, my question to you is, what do you do with that? What do you say to that? Maybe you're thinking that wherever you are today. Maybe you know somebody who thinks that, but I think it would be good to have an answer. And so today, I'm just going to be in keeping with my little series of good questions, and I'm going to give you 3 things that I think that you should know. Because I think that they could be very, very helpful to you where you are, or to somebody that you know, that you care about, that you've been talking with, okay? And I'm going to share those 3 things starting right about now. And the first thing I want you to look at is that this idea that the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those things they call them the Gospels, I want you to look at that and understand that they were not written like, 1,500 years after Jesus. That's the first thing that you have to see. In fact, all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were written, get this, between 30 and 60 years after Jesus died. 30 and 60 years. Depends on which one you're looking at. The oldest one would be John, because John was an old man. He actually made it to be an old man before somebody helped him write this whole thing out officially. But all of them are between somewhere 30 and 60 years. Now, you might think to yourself, 30 and 60 years, that's an awfully long time. Why didn't they just go ahead and do it right as soon as he was up out of the grave? If he really did die and then rise, why didn't they just get that down on paper right away? Well, the answer to that is, probably nobody thought of that. Because it just happened. Let me share something from Luke that might help you. okay, to help you understand what the Gospels really are. I'll read this. This is from Luke 1. This is Luke who compiled all the stories, all the accounts from the people who were on the scene. This is what he wrote. He said, "Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word." In other words, the Gospels are accounts from eyewitnesses. This is what this is all about. This is the official recording of the people who were on the ground floor with Jesus and the things that they said that they saw. It's a testimony. It's a testimony. And what happened was, imagine this for a moment, this amazing event took place, and of course, all of these guys who were eyewitnesses immediately, almost immediately, went out and about and started doing what Jesus told them to do with the news, which is tell everybody. And that's exactly what they did. They went all over the place on foot, telling everybody that they could get to stop long enough to listen. And that is how the gospel was transmitted. And in their minds was not this idea that, oh no, I'm going to die any moment, and then there's going to be all these people after me that need to hear the story. They're just on foot, on fire, let's go, let's tell everybody. And it wasn't until some of these guys started to get to be, in their 40s, in their 50s, in their 60s, that it occurred to someone that Jesus might not come back before they died. They were very, very on fire. They were very concerned with getting the news out to as many people as possible before Jesus came back, but it never occurred to them that they might die before Jesus came back. And as slowly and surely, many of them were executed for their work or persecuted for their work. Many of them actually just died of other reasons, okay? There were getting to be fewer and fewer and fewer of these guys around who could firsthand look people in the eye and say, I was there. Someone decided, actually Luke says many someones decided, we better get this down, so we better make an official record. And Luke says there were many people who made an official record, who tried. And that's what this is. But what you also need to understand is not only were the Gospels actually pretty young compared to what people think, they're actually well corroborated. Do you know what that means, corroborated? The stories line up. If you go and talk to Rich, who was there that Sunday when that Lazarus guy was raised from the dead, he'll tell you about it. And if you go over here and you ask somebody over here who was also there to give the details, they'll give the details, and the details will match, although from a slightly different perspective. And this is how Paul spoke about the gospel, how it was transmitted. In 1 Corinthians 15, he says, "Now, brothers, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you." Preached to you verbally. I told you about it, okay? Which you received and on which you've taken your stand. By this gospel you're saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. For what I received I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Peter and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers all at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. That means they died. They died. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as the one abnormally born. Which is to say, I didn't actually meet Jesus, but yet Jesus came and tracked me down even after he died and got back up again. And then he gave me this job to do. Okay, that's what he's talking about. It's very, very important to look at the Gospels and to see that not only is this a group of eyewitness accounts from different perspectives, but when they were written, because they're not that old, they were written such that there were many, many, many people out there who could confirm or deny whether these things happened or not. And that's what Paul is pointing to. He's basically saying, look, remember, this happened to Peter, and then to the 12, and then to all these guys, all at the same time, and then this and this and this. And he says after that, most of whom are still living. In other words, look, you can go dredge these guys up and ask them for yourselves. If you don't take my word for it, you don't have to. Because there are lots more people out there who were there. It's a testimony. And the more stories about the same story there are, the more faith that you can put in it that it took place that way. Now, some of you are thinking, I don't know, it's just a story. Here's the truth. We convict people for murder and put them away for the same thing. Based upon the credible witness corroborated between 2 or 3 witnesses. Did you know that? That's what testimony is used for nowadays. You know, when you commit a crime of some kind, I don't know what you did. You don't have to announce it here. Maybe you didn't get caught, I don't know. But somebody sees you. And they say, I saw Ramon do that. It's not good enough. It's not good enough. That's he said, she said. Okay, we don't need that. Okay? But if I can find somebody who says, I saw Ramon do that, and then I find somebody else on the other side of the street that also says they saw Ramon do that, but from a slightly different perspective, and then if I find somebody else, if I get 3, 4 people, you're going away, buddy. You're going to the big house. Because as you get more witnesses whose stories corroborate, it just seals the deal. It just seals the deal. And though it is not a perfect proof, although you may not have camera footage of someone doing the thing that we believe that they did, when you have 2 or 3 witnesses who are credible, who all agree in their testimony, in our eyes as people, it's just about a certainty. And so Paul points to all of these people. He's saying, you can go back, you can talk to these people. And throughout the Gospels, you may have noticed this and not thought anything of it. There are little mentions. It's so weird, but there are little mentions of people's names, like, Rufus or Alexander or so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, who happened to carry the cross that day, or so-and-such. And you might think, I have no use for that. It tells me nothing. I don't know who that is. Well, it wasn't really for you in its original form. It was just the recollections of a person remembering a crazy event. Have you ever heard somebody telling a story? An old man tell a story? How many of you ever heard an old man tell a story? Raise your hand. Come on, be truthful. The rest of you are lying. Okay. Well, listen, in case you don't have any old men in your life, that's okay. When you listen to an old man tell a story, it is not like in the movies. Okay? It's not like The Princess Bride. Oh, many years ago, come thanks Columbo, right? Okay, it's not like that. It's not like dramatized perfectly, with a perfect introduction and a preparatory idea statement that's fully developed and all that stuff. You know what they do? They start out with, well, it was back in so-and-so, and, you remember Joey? Joey was down there. He was on the corner with me with that stupid blue t-shirt he always wore, never washed. Boy, that guy stank. Anyways, we were down there, and Jesus happened to be there, and he was talking to this lady. And of course, everybody's standing around going, what are you doing? Talking to that woman all by herself. And she's kind of, she's not somebody you want to be seen talking to. It's so funny. They just interject all these little things that seem to have nothing to do, really, with the story, but they just add color, and you think, okay, I'll put up with it because I want to hear about it. That is a lot of what the Gospels are like. You have all these little blurbs about names and people, and the point that I'm trying to make is that if you were in this day and time, you could go and talk to those people. And not only that, but there were tons of people around who were definitely haters. And they looked for any way that they could, if there was a pinhole somewhere in this story that they could poke, You had to know, as a writer of the gospel, they were going to poke it. They would. Because what is the number one way, if anybody here has watched TV, you know this, what is the number one way to discredit a witness? You got to catch them lying about something, right? They may have been there and witnessed the murder. They may have been there and witnessed the crime. But if they're up there on the stand telling the story and said, well, the day before I was with my friend Joe Bob and we were getting some candy at the store, and then we went out. If you get somebody that said, oh, no, you weren't, because I got 3 guys over here who said you weren't there at all. Okay, that is how you poke a hole in a testimony. But the gospel writers did not write their gospel in a smart way if they were trying to fabricate something. Because, as you know, if you have watched TV, if you go to crime school to be a criminal, the number one thing that they teach you in criminal school is, when they interview about what happened, okay, keep your mouth shut. You don't rattle off details after details after details. You don't do that. Because the less that you put out there, the less they can call you on. You don't put down there that Rufus and so-and-so were down on the other side of the street, and Joe, the other guy, was there, and he helped carry the cross. You don't put any of that stuff out there. It's not necessary. You're taking a risk. If you're going to fabricate something, you don't do that. This isn't written like that. It's very clear if you read the Gospels. It was written by somebody who was just putting out there what they remembered, and they were telling the truth as best they knew, and it didn't much matter to them who you talked to. If you're trying to tell a lie, you keep your mouth shut. If you don't really care, it's hard to keep your mouth shut. When you're telling the truth, it doesn't matter. You can say as much as you want. You may bore people to death, like many old men do. But that's what you have with the Gospels. You need to know that the Gospels were built on testimony. They are a testimony of eyewitnesses to an event. And although you may question their sanity or something, you have to understand that we can date these Gospels. They are, in fact, as old as we believe that they are. And these guys very obviously believed that what happened, happened. And it wasn't just one or two, it was a whole lot of them, all at the same time, who believed that what happened, happened. They believed that Jesus was who they say he was. Something else I want you to see. See, there is an idea that people have. I told you about it at first, just a little bit. There's this idea that, let's say you didn't believe all that other stuff about how old they were and all that stuff. Okay, let's just say that for a second. Okay. But then you start to say, well, maybe somehow, they faked the carbon dating, and they, you can't tell how old they really are, and the old piece of parchment, and who knows. Maybe they just took the gospel and they harnessed it for their own motives. Maybe somebody sat down in the year 500 or 1000 or something like that, and they sat down and they penned this gospel. They made the whole thing up from start to finish. They started with the Hebrew text, the really old ones, and they created their own Messiah, their own Savior, and built this whole big story as a foundation for what would become the Catholic Church, and wealth and power and resources and political control to keep the people down, to keep them in check. I just want to walk you through the philosophy for a second, just for a second. I'm going to make a statement. If you were going to create a narrative, a religious narrative, to control people and to keep them down and to elevate yourself to a place of fame or notoriety or wealth or comfort or something like that, which which the church has been accused of many, 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 many times, and sometimes for good reason. For good reason. But if you were going to do that, this is not the story that you would write. It is not the story that you would write. The only way that you could make the Jesus that is in the Gospels serve whatever your selfish motives are would either be A, scrap it and write a completely different story, or B, to just plain keep anybody from actually seeing what is inside the Gospels. Because Jesus does not make it very easy. He does not cooperate with that narrative. He just doesn't. I want you to take a look at a few examples of Jesus at his finest. Could you do that? Could we just... Yeah, here we go. They tie up cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. All their deeds are done for men to see. Another one. Take another one. And whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Give me another one. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You're like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead men's bones and every kind of impurity. In the same way, on the outside you appear to be righteous, but on the inside you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Give me another. One thing you lack, go and sell all you own and give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. You like that one? I think we've got another one. Do we have another one? Beware, teachers of the law. They like to walk around in flowing robes and love to be greeted with respect in the marketplace and have the most important seats in the synagogues and the places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. These men will be punished most severely. This is not the Jesus that you would create to take people's stuff and to dress fancy and to have a comfortable life at the expense of others, to control people for your own benefit. This is not the Jesus that you would create. If you are going to do those things, and oh boy, you can do those things, history shows us it's true, but the only way to do that would be to keep this Jesus from ever being seen by all the people that are involved. And ironically, that's exactly what happened. That is precisely what happened. You see, when Jesus did his things and when these things were written, most of the people who wrote these things down either wrote them in Hebrew or wrote them in Greek, right? Because that's what they're doing. They spoke Greek. But after a few hundred years, as it became dangerous and then a little less dangerous and a little more dangerous, around the year 405, somebody in the church came up with the idea that we should translate the ones that we have, we should make some translations in Latin. And so they created this official Latin text. They called it the Latin Vulgate. Sounds great, right? But even though there was this wonderful translation of the Gospels in this Latin Vulgate, there were still other translations out there, in the Greek and the things. They're just floating around. Not a ton of people had them. Most people understood the Gospel still by word of mouth because not that many people could read. Some could, most couldn't, but even if they could, it was very difficult to get a hold of a copy because it turns out it's really expensive to pay someone to copy letter by letter and dot by dot with a quill and ink an entire Bible. Did you know that? Yeah, it's hard. It takes a while, right? So most people understood it, but there were enough copies out there floating around that people had some idea still of what was really in the Gospels. But over time, guess what? Politics got involved, and this crazy guy named Constantine gets to be part of the church and kind of takes the church over. And by the year 1229, someone decided that it should be illegal for any person who is not church clergy to own a copy of the Bible, period. No one should have it. Nobody. Punishable by death. You got an unofficial copy, you're hiding it up in a somewhere, okay, in a hole under your bed or whatever. No. And from then on, the Bible became almost non-existent in people's lives. And the only way that you could hear anything about what Jesus actually said or what he actually did was if it was spoken to you by your wonderful clergyman in a robe who spoke it in Latin. And I'm sorry that you don't speak Latin, but trust me, it's in there. Hundreds of years went by like that. Hundreds. No Bible. No Bible for you. And even if you could speak Latin, you couldn't have one because you weren't a priest. And that is how a church gets a very bad reputation. By keeping Jesus from the people. Very dangerous. Oh, no, we wouldn't want ordinary people to get a hold of this. That would be very bad. You know, you might misread something. You might get an error. Leave it to us. We'll handle it for you. We'll tell you what you need to know. Christianity, Jesus was on a need-to-know basis. And for the most part, apparently you didn't need to know. Except, some people didn't accept that. And what you last need to know today is that the only reason that you and I are able to read the Gospels, period, is because there were people who actually sacrificed their very lives just so that you could have the chance to read and decide for yourself. The whole truth, the real thing, start to finish. Not what some guy told you that you needed to know or didn't need to know. No add-ons. Just that eyewitness account. One of the biggest guys, his name was Wycliffe, John Wycliffe. And he was actually one of the priesthood during his time, 1370, 1380, somewhere in there. And he became very, very convicted because he was an academic, he was a scholar, and he had, enough education, he could actually do some translating for himself. He took that Latin Vulgate, they called it, and he started working on his own English translation, which most English people didn't know they didn't even realize that was possible, okay? But he started working on this thing. And at first, nobody knew what to do. But he started telling people, listen, it's not right that the common man doesn't have access to the credible eyewitness accounts of the Gospels. It's not right. And so he started working on a version, and he came up with this version. And here's the thing, get this, he actually got to die of normal causes, believe it or not. But as soon as he was dead, they decided, you know what, we need to clamp this thing up while we have the chance. He's dead. So they dug up his bones, they took him, they burned him in a pile somewhere public, and then they threw the ashes in the river in a metaphorical way, and then they basically outlawed anybody having any unofficial copies of this work. And it was about 120, I think. Criticize my math later, okay? But it was about 100 or so years after that this guy named William Tyndale decides that John Wycliffe had some things right. And he was a very educated man himself, and so he took what John Wycliffe had done. There were still some copies of it floating around. They were hidden, but he had some, and he had that to work with, and he had his own education to work with, and he took the original Hebrew-Greek manuscripts, because he had the education for it, and began to translate what later on, a couple hundred years later, became the King James Bible. That was founded on his work. Do you know what they had to do to him to get him to stop? They strangled him to death and burned his body in public for everybody to see. And it was said, I wasn't there, but it was said that his dying wish in being strangled to death. I don't remember how they did it. They did it by hanging by rope, or if they used ropes and, like this, and they just held it there, trying to get him to recant or something. I don't remember that part. But his dying prayer was that the eyes of the king would be opened to the importance to the people of allowing them to see what was in those Gospels. And his prayer, if that was his prayer, was answered. Because it was about a year later, another guy got permission to take up the work that he had started and nearly finished and complete it. And that was the thing that later on became a huge part of the King James Bible, which later on became translated more to contemporary English. I'm so excited I can't talk straight. Okay, this is why you have this thing. Because somebody thought it was so important. You had to know. You had to be able to look at it for yourself and decide for yourself. And ironically enough, I just look at that and I say, you know what? I'm in support of that. I'm in support of that. When people talk to me about whether they believe in Jesus or whether they don't, whether they think he was one thing or another or maybe something sort of in the middle, do you know what my advice is? It isn't, well, I think it is, therefore you should believe it. It isn't, well, it's the word, therefore you have to believe it's true. No, that's not my answer. My answer is, you know what? You should really read this yourself. You should really take the Gospels and you should read them yourselves. Do you know why I tell them that? Because it worked for me. That's why. When I was a young man, in the middle of my college experience, I looked back at my childhood days, and there had been times when I thought I was turning to Jesus, and I prayed a prayer, and had a moment. But then I went on, and I just got all confused and mixed up about things, and I started to think other things. People really do that, by the way. And there I was, and I don't remember what started it. I was having an argument with somebody maybe, or somebody was questioning my faith about Jesus, and I started to get bothered because they were saying, well, Jesus is definitely this and definitely that and definitely that, and you can't think anything else. And I'm like, what do you mean I can't think anything else? I think things all the time. But it bothered me. So I went home, and I got a hold of my Oxford Study Bible, which college, believe it or not, had required me to purchase as a study of ancient literature. And I pulled that thing out, and I went right to the Jesus parts. And I started reading. Matthew, of all places, right? It's the first one in order. Why not start there? So that's what I did. I started reading. And here's what happened to me. The more I read, and the more I read what Jesus said, I started saying things, you go, Jesus. Oh, yeah, burn. You're burning all these hypocrites. He was calling people out on the very stuff that I didn't like about church people. I said, yeah, finally. And I was part of this little study group, okay, that met on Wednesday nights at a church somewhere. It was interesting to me, so I went and I was part of it. And people were saying things I didn't really quite buy into. I'm like, there's something wrong with that. There's a little bit too much selfish motive in what you're saying and all that stuff. And all of a sudden, I got real interested in reading this because I was going to go there and tell him about Jesus. You jerks. I got real fascinated. I had never read things that were so perfectly true. They just burned right down into my soul how true they were. They weren't filled with all that guile and murk and mirth and stuff that other people put in there and try and get you to think a certain thing. Jesus didn't care what you thought as long as you heard what was true. It was up to you to decide what to do with it. And if you thought it was true, he told you what you could do with it. I loved that about Jesus. That was the beginning of me getting serious and starting to put the dots together and owning my faith for myself. My advice to you, wherever you are in your spiritual journey, whether you are just like, I don't know if I believe all this stuff, I don't know if it's just too much for me, people really ham it up so much, I don't even think they know. Look, just read it for yourself. Just read it for yourself. What could be the harm? What could be the harm? I mean, if it's not true, what's the harm? But if it is true, you're taking a real risk. You're taking a real risk not to. And the fact that people spent centuries covering it up because of what might happen if you laid your eyes on the Gospels should tell you something. There's something powerful going on here. Why would they cover that up like that if it was no big deal? But they did. They worked very hard at it. Why did someone have to die in order for an ordinary person to read it in common English? Why was that necessary? Because there's power in the testimony of someone who has seen firsthand what Jesus has done. There's power in the testimony. And there's also power in the sacrifice, because the sacrifice speaks to the importance of what's in those Gospels. People don't die for nothing on purpose. They died so that you would have, as I believe it was Tyndale that said this, that they would have the whole truth. Might have been Wycliffe, I might get mixed up. But that they would have the whole truth. So, if you are a committed Christian this morning, everyone who's committed Christian, raise your hand. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to do that. Scale of 1 to 10, how committed are you? No, I'm not going to do that either. I'm telling you, you should really read the Gospels. I know you've listened to lots of great sermons. I mean, come on, right? No, I'm just kidding. We know that's not true. Listen, I know you've heard lots of good sermons. You have access, because it's 2021, you have access to actually all of the best preachers in the country pretty much every day, all the time. Which actually makes me a little intimidated sometimes, because I'm like, why would anybody listen to me anyway? But that's not the point. You have access to sermons, and sermons are people telling you about what's in the Gospels. They're trying to open it up and bring the light into the room and help you to see some things that are in there. But the truth is, you really need to read the thing for yourself. And when you start to kind of just survive on a diet of listening to what other people have to say about faith, there is something important that is lost. I do not think that you should try and subsist on listening to sermons every week, twice a week, 3 times a week, 4 times a week. I'm telling you, there is something powerfully different when you open up those books, those Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. When you open those up and you read those words and you realize what this is someone telling you their version of what happened, and they saw it. And maybe they had somebody help them write it down, but they saw it. They were there. It has credibility, and it had credibility with the community that had been there at the same time. And I'm telling you, there's something powerful when you realize somebody had to die just so that you could put your eyes to that paper. And that's all I got for you. So my advice to you, whatever you do, don't stop reading the Gospels. Go anywhere else you want to in the Bible, anytime you want to, but don't stop reading for yourselves, because so much was given so that you could. Amen? One more next week, and we're moving on. I'm going to pray for you, and I just ask, Father, that you would open our eyes to what we have available to us, Lord. What we have is powerful. What we have access to. We don't have to trust somebody else and somebody else and somebody. We can look at what's been sacrificed for and given to us, and we can actually decide for ourselves, do we believe Jesus is who he said he was? Or is he somebody else? We can read and determine it for ourselves what we believe. We thank you for the freedom to do that so many before us didn't have like we have. We thank you for that, Lord. And I just pray this morning that we would be motivated and hungry to see and revisit those moments, that it would be fresh for us in our hearts. The decision that has to be made, do we believe or don't we? Do we believe or don't we? The constant challenge of doubt and faith, God, that it would be fresh and we would be hungry and own it for ourselves. And Father, I also remember those who can't be here today because of the sickness or quarantine. I remember specifically Amy, not this morning, that she can't be here. She's really unwell, and I'm sure that she's got her doubts right now. I'm sure she's questioning whether you really love her like she's always believed with everything that's going on. And for Mike and Gloria, home and ill, and God, I just pray, Lord, that you would speak to their hearts a message of encouragement, real, powerful encouragement right where they sit this morning, Lord, that their heart wouldn't be dark and gloomy, but they would actually have brightness and light inside because of what you've done. Because of these very words that we read about. Father, I pray they'd be moved to open it up for themselves and reread again and find the hope that is there. I pray for healing and recovery for all of these. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I will see you next week.